What does Brazil's banning of Rumble and X tell us, Mike?
Well, it's exactly that. I've been screaming for years now about this Brazil situation and how it's exactly what you identified. The State Department is actually behind this. The State Department, USAID, and the National Endowment for Democracy, which is a CIA cutout, all descended on Brazil. I mean, really in 2016, but really started massively upscaling funding for Brazil's domestic censorship industry in 2018, ahead of the Bolsonaro election, but then especially in the weeks after. Now, let me explain what's going on here. When internet censorship architecture first started getting laid down across NATO and in the United States blob apparatus in 2016, after the events of Brexit and Donald Trump's election, this new tool was proven very powerful to suppress messaging for populist political movements all over the world. And so the State Department began to develop global programs to add censorship to what was previously just their free speech diplomacy. See, the State Department, the USAID, NED, our 1,000 government-organized, non-governmental organizations who serve as the soft power swarm army of the blob, have for about 70 years now had tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars in annual funding from U.S. taxpayers in order to promote open societies abroad, in order to advocate for free speech in foreign countries, so that we, not because we love free speech, but because we needed a free media ecosystem, an open media ecosystem, for us to promote the political parties or candidates or movements who are most pliant to U.S. interests. This is why, for example, in 2018, 26 U.S. government-funded NGOs all signed solidarity letters condemning Russia for possibly, when it was threatening at the time, to ban Telegram. It was because the U.S. State Department and the CIA were using Telegram within Russia in order to organize protests and organize anti-Putin political movements. So they did not want that secure communications ecosystem that the State Department was exploiting to be shut down by Russia. So they attacked Russia for free speech. Now notice, not a single one of those U.S.-funded NGOs said a peep about Brazil actually banning X, that they said about, which is a U.S. national champion, a U.S. platform. So these U.S. NGOs went hog wild mad that Russia might ban a Russian messaging app, but said nothing when X, a much bigger platform, was actually banned by Brazil. And this is because, and this is the story I'll share in a second here, they were actually behind it the whole time. The U.S. government spent tens of millions of dollars censoring Bolsonaro supporters on social media in Brazil, that is, and they do this through their formal government programs dedicated to this, they're split between the U.S. State Department, USAID, and the National Endowment for Democracy. USAID is a notorious CIA funding conduit, which is given huge amounts of dollars for democracy promotion, and then those pumped up assets by USAID or by the National Endowment for Democracy are then back channeled so that we have soft power influence over the information ecosystem or the political ecosystem of a country. The State Department wanted to stop Bolsonaro. They were unsuccessful. They were in October 2018, they decided that it was actually WhatsApp and Telegram that were the big problems, because even though the blob was able to kick Bolsonaro supporters off of Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter 1.0, they all switched to WhatsApp and Telegram. And this is also one of the reasons that Gab, which was one of these upstart, sort of Twitter alternatives in 2018, one of its first major user bases were people from Brazil, because all those people were kicked off of Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, and so they took to alternative messaging ecosystems. So the U.S. State Department funded tens of millions of dollars to Brazilian censorship ecosystem partners, people who were on or around the Supreme Court of Brazil, which is called the STF, the Censorship Court of Alexandre de Moraes, which is called the TSE, as well as their external stakeholder advisory commissions, as well as the constellation of Brazilian university centers, the legal scholars, the fact-checking organizations, the counter-disinformation civil society organizations, and Brazilian media outlets, in order to create this political support base for the censorship laws and the censorship edicts that we are now witnessing play out. And so it's not just that the State Department is silent on this, which of course their silence is absolutely deafening. They were behind this from day one. In fact, they were behind this even before day one. And again, X is caught in a proxy war between the blob versus populism. And so if this was Twitter 1.0, and I mean, just imagine, and I posted this again on my X account, and it blew up to like 10 million views on this one post, and I can put this to the top of my feed after this conversation. But the Biden administration in early 2022 actually descended the U.S. State Department, the CIA, the head of the CIA, Bill Burns, and the head of the U.S. military, Lloyd Austin, all went down to Brazil to personally threaten Bolsonaro, his military officials, his diplomats, and his whole intelligence network, to warn him not to cast doubt on the results of the upcoming Brazilian election or the processes, the electronic voting machines in which they voted. So again, the CIA, the State Department, and the DOD all fund on U.S. taxpayer dollars. We paid for them to take private jets down to Brazil to threaten Bolsonaro just for potentially casting doubt on his own elections. And part of this was because it was the U.S. State Department who railroaded the Brazilian election and Brazilian election officials into using electronic voting machines. I'm not sure if you're aware of this. And again, I posted this on my X account, and I'll repost this at the top of it so everyone can see this. Brazil used about 4 times more electronic voting machines in this election than it ever had in the past. And that was done because the U.S. State Department called in special favors to Taiwan Semiconductor. That is, our diplomats, using American taxpayer dollars, went over to Taiwan and said, yes, listen, there's a semiconductor shortage, but we need these semiconductors to build electronic voting machines in Brazil. And so the normal shipment that you would be giving to Americans during this semiconductor shortfall, give that to Brazil instead of to Americans. Instead of for American computers and American electronics, give that to Brazil so that Brazil can use these a massive increase in electronic voting machines. And that was back-channeled by the U.S. State Department directly. And then Bolsonaro said, actually, I don't trust these electronic voting machines. And when he said that, we sent the CIA to talk to him and his staff, and the U.S. military, Lloyd Austin, the head of the Defense Department, to talk to Brazil's military officials to warn them of the consequences if they continued to simply question the use of electronic voting machines. So just imagine if Bolsonaro had banned Twitter 1.0, because Elon didn't finish his acquisition of X until October of 2022. Imagine if Bolsonaro had banned Twitter 1.0 because too many Lula supporters were on X. Do you know how fast the CIA, the State Department, the DOD, a swarm army of NGOs would descend on them? How fast they would be sanctioned? How fast the $50 million in annual foreign assistance and $200 million over the course of Bolsonaro's term would be yanked? How fast there would be a retrenchment of private sector interests because of his attack on free speech in that country? But the fact is Elon Musk undid all the years, the 6 years of the spider web construction of censorship in Brazil, the star-spangled fangs of that spider, the U.S. funded network, spiderweb network of censorship institutions in Brazil, were all completely defanged when Elon Musk took over the helm and undid all of the censorship that Twitter 1.0 was doing against Brazilians at the time, and actually undid all the damage that Facebook and YouTube and all of these other, and WhatsApp and Telegram, which were brought to heel, because now an even bigger platform, X, which is now bigger than ever, is giving a free speech license to Brazilian politicians. It was actually U.S. funded NGOs who actually clipped out of the legislative bills in Brazil the safe harbors for Brazilian parliamentarians, because U.S. funded NGOs were saying you should not allow Brazilian parliamentarians to have a free pass from misinformation or anti-democratic speech. And so understand this. It was not until about a week ago, and I've been screaming about this. And folks can read, and I'll post this at the top of my timeline too. 2.5 years ago, I did a deep dive on this whole network. It's on my foundation's website. It's called foundationforfreedomonline.com, about this spider web network 2.5 years ago that was set up by our CIA cutouts and our State Department and USAID grantees in order to do this against WhatsApp and Telegram. It's that same network because they got those brought to heel. They actually banned Telegram from the country for 48 hours until they put these censorship measures in place. WhatsApp, because of the pressure they applied to Mark Zuckerberg, who owns WhatsApp, folded within 2.5 days. It took, Telegram held out for 2.5 years. It's that same network on steroids against X. And the U.S. Embassy in Brazil right now is caught in the crosshairs of this. And I'm sorry if I'm going on too long on this, and interrupt me at any time. Maybe I'll just make this as short as I can. But the U.S. Embassy did not feel any pressure on this until about a week ago. I called them out personally in the Tucker Carlson interview. I generated about 130 million impressions about the embassy this week on X. And then finally, 3 hours, for the first time in 6 years, 3 hours before this order came down banning X, the U.S. Embassy put out a statement saying that they are monitoring the situation in Brazil in case there are any human rights violations, and that democracy and free speech, free speech is a key pillar of democracy. Well, guess what? 3 hours later, X was banned from the platform, and the U.S. Embassy said, "I ain't looking." Not a peep. Didn't condemn it. What they were doing was a face-saving operation because they do not want when the autopsy is done on the death of free speech in X, they don't want those star-spangled fangs to show up in the autopsy. But they have not done a single tweet, not a single press release, nothing condemning the actions actually taken, banning it. But they don't want the investigation. They don't want these programs defunded. They don't want to lose their soft power influence, and they don't want to stop bribing Brazilian civil society to keep this going.
Mike, it's pretty extraordinary to hear the extent of collaboration between various US officials and CIA cutouts and recent events in Brazil. Of course, almost as an aside within that, you talked about the likely efficacy or lack thereof of electronic voting machines and the use of semiconductors. And there are so many global issues that fold into this story. It's exciting and a little John le Carre, especially with you wearing those sunglasses. And of course, I'm aware as I'm listening to you explain this that the founder of Telegram has been arrested in France recently, and one could sense in the reportage with regard to recent riots in the UK that there was a burgeoning appetite and the commencement, I would say, of a campaign to normalise the banning of X. So do you see the banning of X in Brazil, significant though it is in a massive company of country, easy mistake to make, of 220 million people, do you see it as a precursor to bans in Anglophonic countries, in the United States itself? Or do you think that's how globalism works now? That whilst this is in itself a seismic event, that it's likely to be even more significant if a country like mine, the UK, bans X? And you can already see with some people that were banned from X being allowed on that it's causing repercussions, and people can say whether that's for good or bad. I'm sure there's a variety of opinions when it comes to some of the more prominent, like Alex Jones or Tommy Robinson, people that certainly make a significant impact and have a significant following. Seems to me that we're moving beyond the stage where we ban individuals, because I suppose that requires the compliance of the platforms and the owners of the platforms, to banning platforms in their entirety across nations. And of course, I sort of almost was unaware, because I've gotten used to it, that Rumble's already banned in Brazil and France and Russia, that even when I was attacked in the UK last September, there was a sense that it could lead to Rumble getting banned and Rumble leadership being under having legal consequences if they were non-compliant with the British government. So where are we now? Do you get the sense that the way these campaigns work is sort of territorially, almost as if it was a military war, that they win the Brazilian front, then they move on to the UK? And can you, if you if you can you sort of let me know what the significance is of the arrest of the Telegram founder Pavel there, and how likely it is that we'll see X banned in other countries, and indeed, of course, Rumble banned in other countries, in the coming months. And if you can tie into that, because I know you can give a long answer, how significant Elon Musk's affiliation with the Trump Kennedy movement is in preventing and opposing that. If you could do it in that order as well, if you don't mind, I'll just sit down and have a little rest.
Yeah, you nailed it. You put your finger right on the pulse of the heart of it. And I'll give you a funny example as a anecdote that I think will tee up what I'm about to say, which is that one of these U.S. funded government programs and its set of program funded institutions actually held a censorship ecosystem cross country stakeholder conference a few months ago, where they brought Brazilian censorship ecosystem participants together with those from other countries like the Philippines. And one of the things that was said in the autopsy of those stakeholder discussions by this government-funded program was that they were saddened that their censorship ecosystem participants in the Philippines were not willing to go as far as those in Brazil. So literally, you have the U.S. government organizing people from dozens of countries for their own censorship ecosystem participants, those in the censorship judiciaries. They'll call them EMBs, election management bodies, who are now tasked with the censorship role. And the Brazilian, and all the different civil society institutions, the NGOs, the university centers, the media participants, everyone who's a part of this counter disinformation, whole society counter disinformation framework, who's coordinating with the U.S. State Department. So you literally have the U.S. government bringing together censorship operatives from dozens of different countries, getting them all to agree on a common framework for censoring populist movements in the country, and then even expressing sadness that some countries are not willing to go as far as Brazil is in cracking down on free speech. So it is exactly, I mean, one of these U.S. censorship programs is in 140 countries. They want to use this as the key to control every single election on Earth, because every single country on Earth falls in some desk run by some assistant secretary at the U.S. State Department, whose job is to make sure that one party wins and the other parties don't rise to power. Because whatever politician pledges the most consistency with the U.S. State Department agenda for that region and its state commercial and financial plans for that region is the party that assistant secretary is going to prop up, and we're going to deploy resources to subvert or suppress the opposition. But now on this Telegram front, I made the same point on Tucker Carlson about Telegram. That was nominally what we were supposed to be talking about the whole time, which is that, have you heard a word from Denise Bauer, the ambassador, the head of the U.S. Embassy in France, about this arrest? You haven't heard a peep. Well, I'm wagering that, and I shouldn't have to be the one asking this. This should be the House Foreign Affairs Committee, who should have already had this answer. I believe it is functionally impossible for the U.S. State Department not to have had at least advance notice about that arrest, let alone participation in the the legal inquiry, the legal investigation that we've now heard had been going on for months before that, or potentially even pushing the French government to do this, because the U.S. has been trying to get its fingers on control over Telegram for a long time now. Telegram has been the darling of the State Department and the CIA and the U.S. military from about 2014 to 2020, because Telegram was this magical tool to be able to run CIA rent-a-riots with a strong level of security, with a strong level of popularity and the ability to mobilize, because outside of the U.S., most people don't use text messages. They use either WhatsApp or Telegram. Telegram has 1 billion users. And what the CIA tries to do is it tries to have its inner cluster cell recruit thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people in that country to all take to the political cause of whatever they're trying to support to unseat the current government. So Telegram was the main weapon used by the CIA in the summer of 2020 to try to topple the government of Belarus. All of the main administrators of the main Telegram channels associated with that attempt to overthrow the Belarusian government were on CIA payroll via the National Endowment for Democracy, which is the main, cutout that's used. And again, that was literally created in a letter from the CIA director in 1983. The Telegram was the main organ used in Hong Kong with the U.S. State Department backed umbrella riots that were done in 2019 in the wake of the extradition law that China had just passed. Telegram was the main artery for this sort of green revolution attempt to overthrow the government of Iran. And Telegram was the main vehicle for the CIA and the State Department to try to topple Putin himself inside Russia. When Alexei Navalny, who was literally brought to Yale for training, at the Maurice Greenberg World Fellows Program. Maurice Greenberg was the guy who Bill Clinton wanted to be the CIA director. When Alexei Navalny was brought to the United States for CIA rent-a-riot training and then sent back into Russia, his main organizing tool for street protests, many of which turned violent with Molotov cocktails, against Putin was Telegram. And again, this was because between 2014 and 2020, Telegram was said to be safe because it was said to be a sort of resistant to Russian back channel control because Pavel Durov, who was the guy behind Telegram and still is, had been pressured by the Russian government to turn over control of Telegram, as he was for VK, which is Russia's Facebook. Pavel had to flee Russia in order to escape the sort of Russian law enforcement threats against him for not turning over the keys to Telegram after he had already turned over the keys to VK. And the fact that Pavel did not censor on VK the Euromaidan protests. Russia had pressured Pavel to ban all of the major accounts of the organizers of the CIA-backed attempt to overthrow the government of Ukraine in 2014. And Pavel disobeyed the Russians and moved to Dubai, non-extradition. And so the CIA and the State Department had this huge trust in Pavel from 2014 to 2020. But then strange things started to happen in the post-2020 period, which was, Pavel did this $1 billion bond raise. And when I say CIA, I mean, I'm not even joking here. Everyone right now, and I posted this again on my X account, and I'll put this to the top of my feed again after this, but you can read 2 weeks after Tucker Carlson's interview with Pavel, the Telegram founder, 2 weeks after his interview with Pavel back in April, so this is a couple months before his arrest, but 2 weeks after that interview with Tucker Carlson, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, this was a media institution created by the CIA and run for its first 20 years directly by the CIA. Again, back from the 1940s to the 1970s, the CIA created Voice of America, created Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Radio Free Asia. These were all CIA radio broadcast and print magazines that were piping in CIA propaganda to influence the course of domestic events in foreign countries. It was how we circumvented the Iron Curtain by piping in these CIA radio broadcasting outlets. And then it started to look a little funny that it was run directly by the CIA in the 1970s. So it was turned over to the Board of Broadcast Governors and now to the U.S. Agency for Global Media. So it's technically not the CIA anymore, but I got bad news for people who are uncynically believe in CIA managed democracy. It's still the CIA, okay? But they literally published 2 weeks after Tucker Carlson's interview a piece called Telegram, a spy in every Ukrainian's pocket. And it basically made the argument that maybe the reason Ukraine is losing the war right now, Ukraine, which the U.S. has invested $300 billion in winning this war, maybe the reason Ukraine is losing the war is because Telegram is captured by Russia. Maybe Russia and Pavel struck a secret deal when Pavel needed the money during this bond raise. And so we need to bring Pavel to heel. We need to wrest control over Telegram's backend to see if there's a Russian back channel to it, because 75% of Ukraine uses Telegram. That's up from 20% 3 years ago. And because Telegram has been trusted, the Ukrainian military all uses Telegram. Ukrainian parliamentarians all use Telegram. Zelensky uses Telegram. So the military, the statecraft, the intelligence, and by the way, the CIA runs Ukraine's intelligence. Don't trust me on that. Trust the New York Times, who wrote a full, 30,000 word piece on how the CIA took over control of Ukraine's intelligence apparatus in 2014. So they make the argument that we need to take control over Telegram because maybe it's backed by the Russians, but we also need to take control over Telegram because uncensored Russian propaganda Telegram channels are widely read by 75% of Ukraine's civilian class because they have access to these Russian channels because Pavel won't take them down. And so we are losing the propaganda war. We're losing the hearts and minds war. Maybe the reason that we can't have elections in Ukraine is because Zelensky might lose. And one of the reasons he might lose is because Ukrainians are revolting against the Zelensky press office because they're more persuaded by these hugely popular Russian Telegram channels. So the CIA has to control Telegram to censor Russian propaganda. And then the third reason they articulate in so many words, and they cite the heads of Ukrainian military intelligence and others, is that over 50% of Russia uses Telegram. And Russia's own internal military documents call for Telegram to be the primary modality of communication. And so if they can break Pavel's back, if they can, literally or figuratively waterboard it out of Pavel to give up the encryption keys, they will suddenly have all Russian military communications, all Russian statecraft and intelligence communications, the panacea of years worth of internal deliberations, of live real-time military activity will all fall into the hands of the CIA and MI6 and the GCHQ and the State Department and Brussels if we can just get Pavel to break his commitment to free speech and give us the same back-end control over Telegram that we've effectively coerced out of Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook and out of most of the major heads of the social media companies.